In this video, we're going to break down the issues that I have with the CMX Community Industry Report. But the answer is not to just not take those surveys, because we need to actually take it. And here's why. We can actually fix all of these problems in the industry and everything I mentioned in this video with a single social scientific formula. But first, naturally, we do need to talk about those problems. We are going to start this video by problematizing one particular set of surveys, the CMX Community Industry Report. But I don't just want to pick on them. This is an industry-wide problem. All of those reports, by the way, are linked down below as sources alongside the academic sources that I used in order to better understand how surveys are conducted. I want to offer a solution. I have 4 main issues that we really need to cover as a result. First off, in social science, there's this thing called the rule of generalization. We have to provide limitations on the data that we are collecting, provide that methodology transparently, and further, we need to stop collecting that information based upon questions we personally have. We need to stop storing that information as if PII and information are the gold standard. Surveys cannot possibly be step 1 in your community process. And this applies to all community. Now, before we get into this video, I have a critical disclaimer. I want you to take it that this is not a sponsored video. I did sit down and interview Beth McIntyre, who is responsible for the report this year, specifically to include some transparency.
I'm Beth McIntyre. I am the Director of Community at Bevy, and I lead the CMX community. I truly believe the report exists for the community. This report provides very little, if any, business value to our organization. This report is one of those consistencies that CMX and the community really required from us this year, to kind of show them that we are still trying to do the things that are really important to the members and giving them the resources they need and that they want.
But I also stated that the requirements for that video and the requirements for me to share this survey kind of adhere to my criticisms.
I'm personally very open to all of these, I guess critiques would be the right word, and suggestions for how it can be better in the future.
First get good, then get better. My criticisms in this video, however, are about getting better. I have full statement. They're not reviewing this video at all, and there's really no bearing in what I have to say. My last disclaimer for the video is also a slight trigger warning, because CMX has been dragged through the dirt. It's got some PR issues and some restorative work to do, so I am going to bring these up briefly, but that's not the point of this video. A lot of that content has to be handled by the individuals who are involved, so I'm going to leave it to those individuals to bring up those stories when they want to. Let's actually get started first with a history of the CMX report, and then we'll dive deeper into the issues that I mentioned. The Community Industry Report is in its 5th annual year. Unfortunately, the survey did not come out for 2018 and 2019, which coincidentally is when Bevy actually purchased CMX, and also when one of the prior co-founders, Carrie Melissa Jones, left the company, and that did not go well. The 2017 report included 533 respondents. The prior report seems to be a little bit more limited in that it's all about media, and it specifically calls out that this is B2B brand communities, and the vast majority of respondents were in excess of $1 million. That's a very clear skew. A skew that we see throughout the majority of the report. The 2020 report included 533 respondents, but that's actually the first year we see the big overarching title, in my opinion, bombastic, the Community Industry Reports. But the 2022 report, which included a little bit of external incentive,
saw this huge spike because we offered gift cards to people, Starbucks gift cards to people who filled out the survey.
There was explicit money poured toward ensuring that the report is actually available. And I actually agree with that decision. But in 2023, there wasn't really very much incentive, especially from Bevy, in order to actually fund the report. So the number of respondents actually became the least that we've ever seen, 425. Can I ask where Bevy stands on funding the report?
I do get paid by Bevy a salary. So when we started the report in 2020, the budget since then has been cut, I would say 75%. This is the first year that I am leading the report project, and I'm doing so on my own.
The history of these reports is massive, and this took an incredible amount of effort because I didn't just cover the CMX reports. It's industry-wide, and honestly, it's a problem in the entirety of the corporate industry structures. I did go back and reread quite a lot of discussion about the way that we do surveys in social science. So all of that effort, I think is really worth you contributing to my Patreon linked down below. Let's go into part 2. Why these surveys don't know their limits. Here's the thing. People look at surveys as the end-all qualitative data tool. That qualitative data can easily be converted into quantitative data, but there are significant problems with it. For instance, whenever you do a survey, a large majority of people don't actually like having long-form qualitative answers. So oftentimes the multiple choice options, they don't actually represent what other people see. And that's why throughout all of these community industry reports, you can see a rather large percentage of quote unquote other.
You may be wondering about the middle category that just says our company does. If you're trying to interpret this, the actual response was, our company does not have a structure.
This is absolutely 100% fixable. We fixed it in the social sciences using 3 main concepts. The first one being the rules of generalization, initially put forward by William Firestone and then expanded upon by Denise Pullitt. Firestone explicitly stated that in any study, predictions must hold specific scope conditions that limit its application. These limitations determine and allow for us to do the second aspect, which is called radical bias. The concept here is when you consider the scientific method, which everyone holds as holy, variables become the limitation and you don't really have to think about it. But the problem is that we're studying humans. Humans are not consistent, so variables are not a viable option. Instead, we have to establish the boundaries for our research. And this is where surveys break down. The first one is considered a case study. This is something like anthropological ethnographic information, such as walking into a field site or walking into a community and jotting down your observations. You can easily devolve this into A concept, applies to B population, only so far as C limitation. Only then are you able to abstract that information using a survey in order to quantify what you learned. We frequently see throughout all of these questions, we were interested in. What that means is that the researchers, in this case, the people responsible for the corporations, were doing audience research, and now they're trying to pass it off as industry standards. The easiest way to solve this problem, and advice that I would give to you at CMX, publish the case study. Once you've published the case study, discuss the questions that came out of it into a focus group of completely different people. Only then can you take the common questions that came out of those interviews and turn them into survey answers. What I will applaud these reports for is the fact that they are asking the same questions. They're wording them differently, which is awesome. It shows a specific evolution. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that one of the main criticisms with CMX as a whole is the fact that they are entirely too contained. Throughout every report, there is this trend that becomes increasingly general that explicitly states the community industry has matured.
So to see more teams creating a dedicated department is huge. Community is number 2 at 22%, which is exciting and different from previous years. So that's one really good signal that community industry is maturing.
Of course, the community's matured. You're surveying the same people year after year after year. And that's really useful, especially when it comes to interviews and research and Bevy being able to actually ask year over year how they're impacting the CMX online community. The problem is, because they're so self-contained, we have absolutely no context for that. They should have also included the results from the Threado interview, and even more, the results from the Edelman's Trust Barometer. And what they should have done is done follow-up interviews with other community development companies so that they could pool their results. What this scope analysis means is that we're now looking at a meta survey. We are connecting the information that occurred, and then we can actually say this is an industry-wide survey. I would like to call out the fact that the 2017 report, the only one that Carrie Melissa Jones actually worked on, does in fact use academic articles and talk about methodology. She talks about the limitations of the fact that the majority of the respondents were $1+ million in revenue, and she explicitly called out that the gaming industry and the open source industry are not represented in the data. As a result, this isn't an industry report, this is a B2B enterprise report. Additionally, in the methodology section, we need to have information about how data was crunched. Did you use a Y model or an X model in order to compare different infrastructural changes? These are very critical metrics definitions that we have to tackle. Now, I also want to call out the country basis, especially in the 2022 and the 2023 reports, because there is a big question, and it is actually super valid, as to what exactly is the salary and what exactly are the job positions that you're expected to actually get as a community industry professional. And that's a super interesting question. The big problem, however, is when you look at the amount of respondents,
50% of our community is in the technology industry. And then over 70% of our community is in the States. So what I've seen over the last 4-5 years is a real concentration of people in a certain area. And I've had more than one community professional from the gaming industry pipe up and say, that they didn't feel seen in this survey. Okay, yes, we're really talking about the tech companies in SaaS. We aren't even really talking about the gaming industry, which I thought we were.
Look at the drop off yet again. And even here, 2% and 1% should be considered outliers. Actually, it's also been well enough informed that the vast majority of those respondents came from Silicon Valley, California. California, on the global index of income, being one of the highest areas in the United States, and definitely one of the highest global per capita places. Now, every report does explicitly have this call out that says global salary levels and salaries in different areas will constantly change based upon the occupation number, the health of the company, and where you are in the world. I really, really like seeing that. But this is also where corroborating evidence is necessary. You should have taken a look at our world in data and the global index. And what I would have recommended is actually placing a footnote here, that footnote saying that you're going to include in the appendix a breakdown that adjusts these salaries.
The salary sample sizes are borked. If you look at the salary differences for an associate, for example, which is probably the most glaring difference that I'm seeing here, that one looks kind of far off. In 2022, 2023, it was $100,934. What the heck happened? In a contracting market, you're telling me that you're making more money as an associate to start? Something is off there. Doesn't sound right to me.
Why is this important? I've actually met people who thought that they weren't being paid what the community management job was worth. A lot of people who were laid off in the 2022 and 2023 years, they actually used these reports in order to inform how much money companies actually needed to pay them. I talked with Todd over at Clock Tower. I talked with Carolyn over at Bad Axe to actually ask, are these prices realistic? No, they are not. They're not. They're not. It was because of the technology.com bubble in Silicon Valley when we were still in our Web3 phase that a whole bunch of startups and a whole bunch of other companies actually paid this money. Startups cannot generally afford six-figure incomes for community managers, especially community managers who also require payment for a platform, additional community moderators and community associates, and the vast majority of individuals who are too low on that totem pole, they're not paid. What this comes down to is primarily self-reporting. Because the limitations and the report features for the community industry report that by and large rely on the individuals who responded, we don't actually have an accurate representation of the industry. For 2024, do you have any thoughts about recontextualizing that industry information, recognizing the power it has?
Wow, great question. I think the other thing I'm going to add to your question back to me is the world of remote working. Just because someone is located somewhere doesn't mean they're necessarily getting paid the average salary or income window of that location, because they might be working for a company that's based out of California. So they might be living in Raleigh, but making California money. But I think that that's where like this remote world has now kind of skewed the geographical and salary data. I wonder if there's a way in that cross-tabulating and analyzing the data that we can accurately and like in a friendly way present that information based on geography and salary and title.
Now, the next issue that this isolation that these CMX community reports have, the fact that they're not corroborating that data with other reports, a vast majority of the data and information coming in isn't referenced. There's no actual references or sources cited. That is like the core of ensuring that fake information does not come through and that the information actually being provided makes sense. The vast majority of the information coming in was by quote anonymous. We need the ability to determine whether or not these individuals are just survey respondents or whether they've actually been in the industry for a long time and can be trusted. The healthy read for this information is that it did come from a survey, and PII reduction is one of the primary concerns. It's a macro trend that started in 2020. It's fine to cite anonymous sources, but you need to say whether or not it came from the survey, and you need to do your due diligence to describe the interviews that happened beforehand, the discovery interviews, and please, please, please follow up with those individuals when you're asking for tooltips to put the names of those people into the community report. This is an appeal to authority. So when you put these tips into the report, you need to be citing them. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the reports are not the only time this happens. A huge amount of talks at CMX actually say, I heard this from someone within the community. And that's kind of a no-go, given CMX's primary mission is for the furtherment of the community industry. A big part of that is making sure that those names are actually known. Now, the easiest possible way to do this, genuinely, I do it on my slides. You don't need to work hard to do it. Just put the picture of the individual that you got the information from and the name. Then link the name to the source that you found it in. That way, when someone actually asks, where did you find that quote or who said the quote, it's there. Before we get to our conclusion, I have an honorable mention. Throughout the course of the reports, the other category has actually been changing in its position. In some cases, it's kicked out of the data. In other cases, it's included in the data. In some cases, it's second on the report when a full third of people are mentioning different platforms. But somewhat curiously, when we're discussing virtual events, it's kicked down to the bottom so that Bevy is directly under Zoom. And in the 2023 report, other is again not in order. You need to pick one because this methodology is kind of troublesome. Not doing this makes the industry report look like a shill. And that goes double for Threado and CommonRoom and everyone else that I covered as a result of this report. So that leaves us with this. If we want the community industry report to actually become something that represents community, we need all businesses writing these reports to follow the following 8 rules. And that's not a matter of reach as marketing has it. We're not just doing this once per year for a single month. What you need to be doing is breaking down each of the segments of your surveys into individual surveys done on a quarterly basis. And then you can report that information and that data across your respondents. Having a 60-page survey split into these sections needs to suggest that their research is happening in sections. The surveys are pointed specifically at individual experiments. That's not happening. It's just one big survey. I highly recommend for this work looking at the process for one of the biggest and best industry surveys out there, the Edelman's Trust Barometer. The questions asked on the survey are really well benchmarked. So I love the fact that I am seeing you compare and contrast with prior years. That's incredible. The actual assessment of those information, we don't know if your methodology looking at those things actually changed. What limitations and hurdles for the report are you bumping up against right now?
To be completely transparent, that lack of resources and just a little bit of imposter syndrome. So I think that's definitely a hurdle. I have an incredible content manager who is helping blast it all over social media. So without her, this wouldn't be possible. Anna, shout out. I think that's the biggest hurdle right now is just lack of resources and a little bit lack of knowledge. I'm relying heavily on Michelle, our consultant, for help.
Please have a references section. APA, MLA, Chicago 4, I don't care. Have a references section. Lastly, I would love it if the next report includes an appendix that includes extended methodology about the math. This goes for Threado, it goes for CommonRoom, it goes for all of them. I want to say thank you so much for doing these surveys and for listening. I understand that this is super critical and that it does call out the major leaders who are responsible for the report every year. For us filling out the report, what do you think is important for us as skeptics to know?
The report truly exists for the CMX community for member value. The information around or the critiques around demographic information or how we're presenting salary, I'm so open to all of that feedback. And without that feedback, we cannot get better. I'm hearing this feedback now after we've launched the survey again. So I've already written a bunch of notes for the next survey that we're going to put out and which questions we're going to include.
The good thing is that I have chosen to be involved. As I said, I do think that CMX is repairable. And a big part of that repair is making sure that I am explicitly critical without being censored by CMX. I want to end this on an open letter to CMX. You have a lot to fix, and I am absolutely willing to help you repair that fact. But the reality is, the industry actually doesn't need you. And that's what's at stake here. It's entirely plausible that someone else could replace you in the industry if you don't listen to this feedback. If you want CMX to return to being a great funnel for your business, it is not about creating a reciprocal relationship between us, the community, and you. It's about creating an empathetic one that allows us to feel comfortable actually supporting you. Now again, this video is not sponsored, so I am relying pretty heavily on the Patreon subscribers that I just want to say thank you so much to. But let's be real, it's not enough. The channel is not ad supported, so I'm relying very heavily on you at Patreon. And if you'd like to know more videos, I highly recommend looking at my industry reports here. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that it gave you some information about your own surveys. I hope that you are willing to contribute to this, and together we'll create a better, higher resolution social scientific reality for online community.